In the shadowy corridors of history, where whispers carry more weight than screams, a war has unfolded, one never officially declared. It is not waged with weapons, but with symbols, ideas, and silence. Freemasonry versus the Vatican. Two powers, two universes that, despite their differences, share eerily similar structures, rituals, secrets, and a profound faith. One in the divinity of reason, the other in the authority of God. But what truly separates these forces? And why, even after centuries, does the friction between them continue to fuel speculation, theories, and conspiracies? If this story intrigues you, prepare yourself, because what you're about to hear is for those who dare to see beyond the surface. Subscribe now to Vaticano Occulto, leave a like, and comment below. Do you believe this rivalry still shapes the course of the modern world? The scene does not open with war. There are no marching armies, no raised flags. What exists is an eerie silence, a sort of unwritten pact between two powers that avoid each other as much as they observe each other. It's an old game of hidden glances and words spoken between the lines. For centuries, the Catholic Church and Freemasonry walked parallel paths, like two rivers that never touch, yet mold the banks they pass through. And though no direct confrontation has ever been officially declared, the tension between them is embedded in the darkest pages of history. A tension that pulses, that whispers, that endures. Freemasonry presents itself as a fraternity, but it carries all the elements of an initiatic order, symbols, rituals, degrees of ascension, and an internal ethic that is almost impenetrable. To many, it represents the light of knowledge, freedom of thought, the triumph of reason over dogma. The Vatican, in contrast, with its millennia-old authority, stands as the guardian of a revealed faith, of immutable dogmas, of absolute truth. And it is precisely there that the conflict is born. For while one defends the personal path toward truth, the other declares that truth has already been revealed and must be followed. But what few realize is that the two share more than one might think. Both uphold rigid hierarchies, internal codes, and a profound obsession with the sacred. Both believe in the existence of a higher knowledge, and both believe they are its rightful keepers. And when two institutions battle not only for control over souls, but for the very meaning of what it means to be human, the result is inevitable. Confrontation, denial, persecution, and silence. In this case, silence is not the absence of words. It is a strategy. It is survival. Because to reveal too much is to surrender power. And so, over the centuries, this rivalry evolved, sometimes through veiled clashes, sometimes through disguised alliances, and always, always, with the certainty that something far greater is at stake. An ancient code, perhaps, a shared secret, a truth that, if revealed, would upend everything we know about faith, power, and freedom. In this video, we will peel back the layers of this conflict. We will delve into the backrooms of papal bulls, into the secret rituals of the lodges, into forbidden archives and conspiracies linking saints to initiates, popes to masters. And perhaps, just perhaps, we'll uncover something neither side wants us to know. Are you ready to find out? Rome, 1738. The streets of the Eternal City breathed politics, religion, and secrets. Inside one of the most guarded halls of the Vatican, lit only by candles, Pope Clement XII was finishing the signing of one of the most controversial documents of his time, the bull In Eminenti Apostolatus Specula. With a steady hand, he officially sealed the condemnation of Freemasonry. But the gesture was more than just a signature. It was a preemptive strike, a formal warning against what Rome was beginning to perceive as an invisible, yet growing threat. A network of influential men, well-read, secretly organized, and driven by an idea dangerous to the ecclesiastical hierarchy: the freedom to think. The papal bull was clear. Any Catholic who took part in Masonic gatherings would be immediately excommunicated. The language was direct, leaving no room for ambiguity. For some, it was a political maneuver. For others, a spiritual defense. The Vatican no longer saw Freemasonry merely as a group of thinkers, but as a rival power. After all, their meetings were held in secret. Their members pledged loyalty to one another, not to the Church, and their structure eerily mirrored Catholicism itself: degrees of initiation, mystical symbols, and a profound sense of mission. But something even more disturbing lay beneath. Freemasonry did not profess a revealed faith. It accepted no dogma. Its core belief was in a universal God, accessible through reason and human experience. For the Freemasons, every man could find truth on his own. That idea, that enlightenment did not need to pass through sacraments, clergy, or confession, was to the Vatican a sophisticated form of heresy, and perhaps for that very reason, so dangerous. The Pope's decision was not made in a vacuum. By then, word had already spread that various European courts were being influenced by Masons: nobles, royal advisors, bankers. They met in taverns and libraries, spoke Latin, quoted Pythagoras, Hermes, Moses. They built invisible cathedrals out of symbols and words, and little by little, they were constructing a parallel power, discreet but effective. It wasn't just theology, it was geopolitics. The Vatican knew it, and so it acted with severity. But severity sometimes breeds fascination, and the bull, instead of containing, attracted. It created martyrs. It drew in the curious. It reinforced the aura of mystery surrounding the lodges. The attempt to silence gave them a voice. The attempt to hide cast a light. Because the more a secret is repressed, the more it spreads. From that point forward, relations between the Church and Freemasonry would never again be neutral. Even in silence, both sides knew the line had been drawn. A line that separated two worlds, but also revealed just how closely those worlds observed, inspired, and feared each other. From that moment on, every step, every ritual, every decision became a move on this chessboard of shadows and symbols. The ideological chasm deepening between the Vatican and Freemasonry had even more complex philosophical roots. On one side, deism, a belief that acknowledged a creator, but rejected divine intervention in human affairs, dismissing revelation, dogma, and sacred scripture. On the other side, Catholic faith, built upon divine revelation, apostolic tradition, and the sacraments as indispensable channels of salvation. These two visions not only opposed each other, but collided irreconcilably, creating an invisible battlefield between reason and devotion, between individual autonomy and submission to doctrine. Freemasonry, influenced by the Enlightenment, saw reason as the supreme tool of human elevation. Its temples did not require kneeling before saints or relics, but rather reflection, debate, and contemplation. The pursuit of knowledge was the true form of worship, and in this worship, God was the great architect of the universe, a being who created all things, but did not intervene with miracles or dogmas. The Church, in contrast, taught that truth wasn't discovered, but received, not built, but transmitted. And only through faith and obedience could redemption be attained. This philosophical antagonism fed a deep mutual distrust. Freemasons saw the Church as a regressive force, resistant to progress, chained to traditions that suffocated the human spirit. Catholics, in turn, viewed Freemasonry as dangerous relativism, an open door to nihilism and the erosion of eternal values. The confrontations didn't occur only in pulpits and manifestos, but in universities, academies, and debating halls, where one side championed free thought, the other defended revealed truth. Where one found light in reason, the other saw darkness in doubt. But the most fascinating, and at the same time unsettling, truth was that both sides were ultimately in pursuit of the same thing: truth. The difference lay in the path. For Freemasons, the path was internal, personal, individual. For the Church, it was external, communal, and mediated by the sacred institution. This divergence could not be resolved through treatise, because it was not a battle over territory, it was a battle over meaning. And when meaning itself is contested, every word becomes a weapon, every symbol becomes a trench, every silence a suspicion. And so, across the centuries, Masonic deism and Catholic faith continued to observe one another with caution, like two planets orbiting the same sun, never touching, always aware that at any moment a new spark could reignite the fire of a conflict that, in truth, never ceased to burn. As the winds of modernity swept across Europe, a new force began to take shape in the streets, in gas-lit cafes, in court salons and industrial alleys. Revolution. And it arrived not only with weapons and banners, but with ideas. Ideas that fermented in Masonic lodges and spread like sparks across the continent. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Powerful concepts born from Enlightenment philosophy, but forged beneath the hammer and compass. And these ideas began to threaten the oldest and most rigid structures of society, including, of course, the Church. Behind the scenes of the French Revolution, for example, were men with direct ties to Masonic lodges. They weren't just laborers or philosophers. They were politicians, bankers, generals, and many of them saw the Church as an obstacle to the emancipation of reason. At the fall of the Bastille in 1789, more than just symbolic prisoners were freed. It was the collapse of a system, the Ancien Régime, sustained by a centuries-old alliance between throne and altar. And when the altar fell, a part of the Vatican's moral authority over the fate of nations collapsed with it. Not long after, the first republics began to emerge, and within them, Freemasonry grew as an invisible pillar. Its lodges multiplied, its doctrines became more sophisticated, its influence expanded into the halls of power. Meanwhile, the Church responded with encyclicals, synods, and condemnations. But it seemed that its words no longer held the weight they once did. The people, now literate, no longer listened only to sermons. They read pamphlets, newspapers, manifestos, and in these texts, the Church was often portrayed as archaic, oppressive, aligned with the elite. This new landscape strengthened the political role of Freemasonry. In many countries, its lodges began to directly influence state decisions, laws, educational reforms, the separation of church and state. And though not all Masons were anti-clerical, the notion of a secular, neutral, and rational public sphere began to gain ground, and once again, the Church found itself cornered, not by invading armies, but by ideas that marched armed with words, symbols, and votes. The tension was not merely theoretical. In countries like Italy, Mexico, and even Brazil, Masons were persecuted by conservative regimes aligned with the Church. But there were also priests, bishops, and even popes accused of sympathizing with Masonic ideas. The game was more complex than it seemed. And while the altars remained standing, and the discreet temples continued their dimly lit meetings, a new reality was being born. A world where the sacred and the profane, the public and the occult, the visible and the symbolic, became irreversibly intertwined. Faced with this accelerating transformation and increasingly intense ideological clashes, the Vatican chose to strengthen its stance. A general condemnation was no longer enough. It was necessary to name names, to point fingers, to etch in sacred stone the Church's official position. Thus emerged what would later be known as the Bulls of the Holy War. Papal decrees that, more than theological documents, functioned as spiritual weapons, defending the flock and attacking the advance of ideas deemed heretical. In 1821, Pope Pius VII issued Ecclesiam a Jesu Christo, reinforcing the excommunication of Freemasons and accusing them of subverting moral and religious order. The tone was direct, almost military. The text likened Freemasonry to a sect threatening the very essence of Christian civilization. But the most emblematic came in 1884. The bull Humanum Genus by Pope Leo XIII not only condemned Freemasonry explicitly, it laid out a true map of opposition between two kingdoms, that of divine light and that of satanic darkness. The language was symbolic, almost apocalyptic. Freemasonry was described as the modern incarnation of the ancient serpent, an anti-Christian force that behind a discourse of progress and liberty concealed a project of spiritual domination over the world. The war had been declared, and there was no room for neutrality. These bulls, widely circulated among the clergy, served as combat manuals. They called for vigilance. They urged priests to identify signs of Masonic infiltration within ecclesiastical circles. And more, that educators, politicians, and even heads of families should beware of books, ideas, and symbols that might be contaminated by this influence. It was a time of symbolic persecution and also of resistance. Curiously, even as these papal bulls multiplied, so too did rumors that influential figures within the Church itself maintained contact with high-ranking Masons, a tension that never fully ceased, a contradiction that only deepened the air of conspiracy. Because the more the Vatican attacked publicly, the louder the whispers grew, that in the background, the ties had never truly been severed. The conflict was no longer merely between institutions. It had become internal, waged within each conscience, each pulpit, each temple, and the holy war, far from being won, merely changed form. In the inner chambers of the Vatican, darkness was broken only by the flicker of candlelight. The thick walls seemed to guard in silence the centuries of decisions made far from the public eye. There, among marble columns and tapestries that concealed more than they displayed, a new offensive was being drafted against a silent enemy. An enemy that carried no banners and wielded no swords, but had already infiltrated ideas, revolutions, and the very foundations of the modern world. The parchment was thick, sealed with wax and the papal coat of arms. The text, carved carefully in severe language, denounced the intentions of Freemasonry as a spiritual poison. It was a war of words, a holy war without blood, but with eternal condemnations. Humanum Genus, the bull of Leo XIII, was more than a document. It was a cry of resistance against the advance of an order that, in the eyes of the Church, threatened the soul of man. The Pope did not see Masons merely as heretics. He saw them as architects of a new Tower of Babel, a world without God, but with its own morality, a universe where truth was not revealed by divine inspiration, but built in secret assemblies. In that bull, Freemasonry was portrayed as the antithesis of Christianity. Its values were seen as an inversion of the natural order, a system attempting to replace spirit with symbol, the gospel with geometry, and the cross with the square and compass. The Pope's words echoed through pulpits, confessionals, and Catholic embassies. From that moment forward, being a Freemason became automatic grounds for excommunication. A sentence that, though silent, marked the soul of the initiate forever. And still, the Masons continued to meet. They continued to swear oaths in the name of a cosmic archetype, to study parallel scriptures, to conspire in the hidden chambers of history. The bull had sent a warning to the world. Either follow the revealed faith, or walk blindly through the shadows of the temple. But what even the Vatican had not foreseen was that Freemasonry would not retreat. It would adapt. And in the decades that followed, new forms of influence would begin to emerge, penetrating not only the palaces of power, but also the vaults of finance, the codes of politics, and perhaps even the sacred corridors of the Church itself. At certain moments in history, the shadows become so thick that even the light of the altar struggles to pierce through. So it was in the 1980s, when one of the most disturbing political scandals in modern Europe erupted around the name of a lodge that had, until then, remained hidden from public view. Propaganda due. Lodge P2, officially a Masonic organization, unofficially something far deeper and far more dangerous. For decades, Lodge P2 operated in the margins of Italian power. Its members read like a conspiratorial thriller: generals, ministers, bankers, journalists, and, according to investigations of the time, even names linked to the clergy. The scandal broke when a banking investigation uncovered secret documents with lists of affiliates and plans hinting at the quiet manipulation of entire sectors of the state. The nation was in shock. and in the Vatican corridors, the silence grew even heavier. The seized documents suggested that P2 was not just a philosophical discussion group. Its internal statutes outlined the formation of a new social order based on a parallel morality, free from religious dogma and republican structures, a kind of state within a state. And according to many scholars, this structure was supported by symbols, rituals, and oaths that echoed ancient traditions, but had adopted a new purpose: domination through deception. Inside those documents were plans for media control, political party infiltration, judicial manipulation. No conclusive evidence linked these actions directly to the Church, and that is precisely why silence became Rome's most eloquent response. Because when denial is not possible, silence becomes protection. The Vatican's response was cautious. No direct statement, no explicit condemnation. But within the walls of the Roman Curia, the P2 scandal reawakened ancient fears. The possibility that, as long suspected, Freemasonry might be operating within the Church's own structure. The secret archives were fortified, surveillance intensified, and the documents that once sat openly on desks were now kept under double lock. P2 had shown that modern times were not immune to conspiracies. They had merely become more sophisticated. The questions lingered in the air, like the smoke of ancient incense that refuses to dissipate. Who was really pulling the strings behind P2? Why did so many documents disappear after the first investigations? And above all, what still remains unrevealed? The official story fell silent, but in the background, whispers continued to circulate. Because when one lodge is forcibly closed, often other doors open quietly. There was something about Pope John Paul II, a presence that blended charisma and solemnity, as if every gesture carried not only the weight of the papacy, but also the living memory of ancient conflicts that still haunted the foundations of the Church. It was the early 1980s, and the Catholic world seemed to be entering an era of reconciliation. But beneath the surface of diplomacy and ecumenism, the old struggle between the Vatican and Freemasonry still simmered, like embers hidden beneath ashes. And then, in 1983, came the reaffirmation, clear, categorical. The revised Code of Canon Law, under his pontificate, firmly maintained the condemnation of faithful who chose to affiliate with secret societies, especially those which plot against the Church. Freemasonry was, once again, the silent target. The new formulation did not mention the Freemasons directly, but between the lines, the message was unmistakable. The Vatican, even after centuries of condemnation, still saw Freemasonry as a constant danger. But the world had changed. The media landscape demanded caution. The words were chosen carefully, published in internal documents, doctrinal commentaries, discreet instructions to bishops. It was a different strategy from the medieval bulls. No more shouting from the pulpit. Now, instructions came in whispers. John Paul II knew what was at stake. For many within the Church, Freemasonry was not just a philosophical order, but a subterranean network with tentacles reaching into universities, governments, councils, and perhaps even ecclesiastical cabinets. The new condemnation was both a warning and a reminder. The incompatibility between the two worldviews persisted, revealed faith versus hidden reason, spiritual obedience versus enlightenment autonomy. And even though the words were measured, the conflict continued to pulse in the silence between the bells. In modern cities, where cathedrals share space with skyscrapers and ancient temples are almost swallowed by the noise of the avenues, there are still doors that do not open easily. Some of them, discreet, almost imperceptible, are located on ordinary corners, adorned with symbols that few recognize: a compass, a square, a blazing star. It is there, far from the public eye, that Freemasonry members continue to gather. No announcements, no social media, no sermons, only silence and tradition. The question becomes inevitable. What does Freemasonry represent today? Is it merely a philosophical club of respectable gentlemen devoted to ethics, philanthropy, and knowledge? Or does it still operate as a silent power structure, capable of influencing political, economic, and perhaps spiritual decisions? The answer depends on who you ask. To some scholars, contemporary Freemasonry has lost the conspiratorial vigor of past centuries. To others, it has simply adapted, trading swords for strategy, cloaks for formal suits, and influence for consensus. Meanwhile, in the Vatican, vigilance endures, the condemnations remain in force, and no official reconciliation has ever been declared. The Church continues to view Freemasonry as an entity whose moral code, however well-intentioned, clashes fundamentally with Christian doctrine. But there are those who believe that this apparent distance hides, in truth, a silent coexistence. Because in certain parts of the world, priests and Freemasons share the same social spaces, the same tables, the same humanitarian ideals. The line between what is permitted and what is forbidden is no longer so clear. Today, Freemasonry is, above all, a presence, invisible yet active. And if it no longer promotes revolutions or public clashes, perhaps it has simply understood the game on a deeper level. True power is that which never needs to announce itself. Absolute power, some say, is the kind that hides in plain sight. Behind the scenes of history, not everything is defined by clear antagonisms. In many cases, the oldest enemies find, in the shadows, fertile ground for silent agreements. And it is precisely in this obscure space that one of the most unsettling hypotheses emerges. What if, at some point, the Vatican and Freemasonry were not on opposing sides, but on the same board? The evidence is scarce, fragmented, often buried beneath official narratives. But some scholars and former members of secret orders suggest that during certain historical periods, there was more than just conflict. There was contact, exchanges, shared codes, and perhaps even collaborations disguised as rivalry. Freemasonry, with its hierarchical structure, sacred rituals, and esoteric symbolism, shares more similarities with the Church than is usually admitted. Both operate through initiation. Both guard documents in inaccessible libraries. Both claim to possess universal truths. The square and compass, so condemned in papal homilies, find their counterpart in the crossed keys of St. Peter. Could it be that, at some point, the separation between these entities was more political than spiritual? There are unconfirmed reports of high-ranking clergy maintaining ties with discreet Masonic lodges. Some unofficial documents suggest that secret meetings took place during the most turbulent years of the post-war era, when the Vatican sought to reorganize its influence in a divided world. In exchange for protection, access, or political support, did the Vatican quietly tolerate the presence of Masons in certain ecclesiastical circles? Naturally, the Church has always denied any involvement. The doctrine remains clear. There is no compatibility between Christian faith and Masonic principles. But what doctrine does not explain? The corridors whisper, and sometimes what remains unsaid reveals more than what is proclaimed. The possibility of a forbidden alliance between two such ancient powers challenges our perception of good and evil, light and darkness, because perhaps in certain moments of history, the greatest secret was not the conflict, but the pact. On the surface, everything seems calm. The Church maintains its dogmas. Freemasonry preserves its rites, each with its own language, its own temples, its own ceremonies. But beneath the surface of history, among documents never displayed, meetings never recorded, and libraries never opened to the public, a tension still pulses. It hasn't disappeared. It has merely changed form. The future of this rivalry will not be decided by swords, bulls, or excommunications. It will be shaped by selective memory, elegant omissions, and a society increasingly thirsty for answers. While the Vatican faces an era of internal transformation, moral debates, and global challenges, Freemasonry seems to follow its discrete path, adapting to the times, transforming itself into foundations, philanthropic centers, ethics councils, and discrete associations that operate on the edge of legality and tradition. To the casual observer, they may seem like separate worlds. But for those who learn to read the signs, symbols carved on facades, gestures in public ceremonies, carefully chosen words, the truth appears closer to an unacknowledged convergence. Can faith, as we know it, survive in a world where mysteries are constantly being revealed, analyzed, decoded? And does secrecy, so vital to the sanctity of certain traditions, still have a place in an age obsessed with transparency? The truth is, both the Vatican and Freemasonry live a paradox. They need secrecy to preserve their identity, but they need the light to continue to exist. And perhaps, in that dilemma, lies the true battlefield of the future. And this is where your voice becomes part of the mystery. Do you believe this rivalry still shapes the hidden corridors of spiritual and political power? Or is it all just a narrative inherited from centuries past, kept alive by symbols and ancient fears? Leave a comment and tell us. Do you see Freemasonry as a silent threat, or as part of the same 1,000-year theater the Vatican helped build? If this video shook your beliefs, share it with someone who also feels that there is something beneath the surface. And above all, subscribe to the Vaticano Occulto channel, because the next episodes will delve even deeper into forgotten archives, hidden orders, and the pacts that sealed the fate of Western faith.
Misteri.